Sleepers are one thing, but surprises are another. Which Big Ten teams could catch us all off guard with their success in 2024?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Sleepers and surprises. I think these are two things that are pretty different. I think those sleeper teams are those teams maybe just outside the tier 1 or the tier 2 that people might be sleeping on, not maybe to get to that level where they win 8 wins, where they get to 9 wins, maybe where they even get to 10 victories. You know, we talked about Nebraska earlier in the week and what they have. USC is maybe a team that people are sleeping on, maybe to get to that upper echelon of the Big Ten here this season. But I want to talk today about surprises, because when you look at the hodgepodge of what the Big Ten is this year, right? You throw out divisions, East and West, you bring in 4 teams from the Pac-12, you throw it into an 18-team Big Ten, with every school playing a 9-game conference schedule, and you're bound to have some chaos. You're bound to have some surprises. Maybe teams that you wouldn't expect to be good, because there are teams on this list, they could be undefeated halfway through the season. They could be a 5-1 through 6 games. And some of these schools on this list, yeah, they're not traditional teams that you would expect to be 6-0 or 5-1, or maybe even in some cases 4-2 halfway through the season. But considering all that's happening and all the change within the Big Ten, we're going to see it. We're going to see some chaos. So when I look at the surprises, I want to start first, and I think you have to start first with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And this is kind of, we're getting a little bit more people talking about it, so maybe it's becoming less of a surprise. But when I look at the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, man, this is a team that can win 8 games. This is a team, like Eric LeGrand says, they can win 9 games this season, because the first thing that really pops out into my mind, they don't play any Tier 1 Big Ten teams. They don't play any Tier 2 Big Ten teams. No Ohio State, no Oregon, no Michigan, no Penn State. According to a lot of strength of schedule metrics, they have the easiest schedule in the Big Ten Conference. And you combine that with the experience that they have coming back and everything that they've gone through building their program up to this point, it's a perfect combination for that surprise team, for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights to get to that 8-win level, to get to that 9-win level. When I look at this team in Piscataway, New Jersey, I look to the defensive side of the football. And I talked about experience when I talked about Nebraska. I talked about experience a few weeks back when I talked about Michigan. It is such a key part to have good, experienced talent returning, especially when it's been in your system for a few years. And that's exactly what's going on here with this Rutgers defense. I look at Aaron Lewis coming off the edge there on that defensive line. I look at this linebacking group, Mohamed Toure. When you look at Tyreen Powell as well, you look at the defensive backfield, guys like Robert Longerbeam and Flip Dixon, guys that have been there and done that knows what it takes. They know the system here at Rutgers. They know to keep on chopping, right? So you bring back all of these guys when they easily could have transferred to a bigger program. Having them back on this defensive unit is going to be so huge. I think Rutgers has a really good defense, but considering the conference they play in, they could have a middle-of-the-road defense in the Big Ten and still be that much better. That's how good this conference of defense, that's how good the Big Ten is. You switch over to the offensive side of the football, you had the bell cow. You return the Big Ten's leading rusher in Kyle Monangai, right? He was a 1,200-yard rusher last season. Somehow he's being slept on when we look at these top running back lists that are out there. Big Ten's leading rusher, right? This is the ground and pound conference, and yet people are kind of sleeping on the guy that led the way last season. But Kyle Monangai is a big part of it. But I think a bigger part of it is the improvement that the Scarlet Knights should have on the perimeter. This was a team that just flat out could not throw the football. This was a one-dimensional offense last season. Dymere Miller is an FCS transfer that's coming in that has a lot of speed. He has a lot of explosiveness. He's that player that Rutgers didn't have last year that can get to that second, that third level of the defense and be that deep threat that can really stretch the field and be a playmaker on the outside. Nassim Brantley had an NCAA issue last year. He's expected to really be a big part in this Rutgers pass game as well. Ethan Kaliakmanis. Okay, he was inconsistent over there at Minnesota. They're hoping the reunion of Kirk Ciarrocca and Ethan Kaliakmanis can produce wonders when you combine it with a run game to lean on, when you combine it with some improvement out at the wide receiver position. He's going to need to be better. He's going to need to be more consistently good than he was at Minnesota. They're hoping all of these moving parts, they can put the puzzle pieces together, and it's all going to end up very well. I just love the way this 2024 Rutgers Scarlet Knights team is built. Let's move on to my next team, and let's talk about the first-year head coach in Bloomington, Indiana. Let's talk about Curt Cignetti. This is a team in the Indiana Hoosiers, and I'm in this group as well. They're at the bottom of a lot of Big Ten power rankings this year. And when you look at the way this football team, with the way this roster has been flipped, and what Curt Cignetti is good at historically and what he develops well historically, this is a team that I think fits the mold of what Curt wants them to be. This is a team that's going to be wide open. This is a team that's going to have a lot of depth and skill on the outside. They're going to look to pitch the ball around the yard and be explosive on the offensive side of the ball. That's, I think, what this Indiana administration knew what they were getting when they hired Curt Cignetti, that this was going to be a better offensive football team. Curtis Rourke transferring in at the quarterback position. He's a big arm kind of guy that when healthy, he's got the arm to get it deep. He's got the arm to get it to all of these receivers. And there is a lot of depth at wide receiver. I look at this room and I think that, I'm not saying certainly that's Oregon. Oregon's got the best wide receiver room. Ohio State, we know what they are, right, in terms of their talent. But this is a wide receiver room. This is a skill position that's going to surprise some people, I think, this year. When you look at Elijah Surratt, Miles Price, 410 yards, 5 touchdowns at Texas Tech last season. Miles Cross, 617 yards and 5 touchdowns at Ohio. Donovan McCulley is coming back. I love the quote that Curt gave in his interview with Adam Brenneman, and Curt Cignetti has been saying this really all offseason. When it talks about flipping the roster, when you talk about bringing in talent and acquiring talent, it's production over potential. He wants to bring in guys that have been there and done that maybe not guys that just have stars attached to their name that were at a bigger school that don't have a lot of experience on the field. He wants guys that have done it. And I kind of like that approach that Curt is really taking to put together this roster. And we talked before about flipping this roster, 30 transfers in, 38 transfers out. So this is a brand new Indiana football team. I actually think they're pretty decent on the defensive line and the entire defense as well. This is an Indiana team I think that everybody should watch out for as a surprise team. When you look at their schedule, it is favorable, specifically early in the season. How about this for an opening slate of games? Home against FIU, home against Western Illinois, at UCLA in the Rose Bowl, versus Charlotte, versus Maryland, and at Northwestern. There's a chance that Indiana could start the first half of the season somewhere like 4-2 or 5-1 at that point of the season. I think Indiana could be that team that gets a lot of people's attention early. Now, the back half of the schedule is more difficult for the Hoosiers. I think we need to really talk about that. And maybe they start off strong, but maybe they fade out a little bit more later in the season as the schedule gets more difficult. But I really like what Indiana's looking like here in year number 1 under Curt Cignetti. Let's talk about the Maryland Terrapins. Mike Locksley, I say it all the time. I think he's one of the more underrated coaches in college football. When you look at where Maryland was before and when you look at where Maryland is now, this is a team that just ho-hum, 7 wins, 8-win seasons, and that was certainly not the norm of Maryland football before he got there. When I look at this Terps team this year, a lot of people, the last couple of years, have leaned towards talking about offense first, but it's the defense for Maryland I think that could really propel them to that next level, surprise some people, and maybe get to that 8 or 9 win level in the regular season. When you look at the personnel on this team, I really like Ruben Hippolyte over there at linebacker. I really like Donnell Brown as well on that defense. I look at Dante Trader, Jordan Phillips, and over there on the defensive line for the Terps. This is a really good defense for Maryland. I know maybe not a lot of people are going to be talking about that right now, but we're just notching up another good, solid defense in the Big Ten, and the Terps certainly have one as well. And it's kind of crazy that we're talking about this Maryland team possibly having the best defense of the Loxley era after you lose probably your best defensive player, Jayshon Barham. He ends up transferring over to Michigan, and then you lose Bo Braid at the safety position. On the offensive side of the ball, this is still a Terps team that has talent. I look at Roman Hemby coming back once again. I look at Colby McDonald. Nolan Ray is a young player to really watch out for in that running back room. There's some depth there, that pair and the spare that we talk about. You look on the perimeter, right? It's just another Maryland season where you have really talented players at the wide receiver position. You look at Ty Felton. You look at Caden Prather. You look at Octavian Smith. There's some good talent on the outside. I think a big part of the success of the Maryland Terrapins is going to be on the shoulders of the young quarterback, MJ Morris. I think he's going to be the guy that's going to start to begin the season. I think you watched during the spring game, he seemed like the more complete quarterback when you're comparing Billy Edwards and Cameron Edge. I think he's going to be the guy. He brings something else with his mobility as well. But this is a Maryland team. They're not going to be so reliant on their offense and their ability to push the football down the field like they were with Taulia Tagovailoa. I think that this is going to be a more balanced Maryland team this season and could surprise some people, because when you look at the Terps and what their schedule is looking like, once again, an early season schedule that plays into the favor of a Big Ten football team. Home against UConn, home against Michigan State, at Virginia, at Indiana, home against Northwestern. That's a pretty good possibility that they are going to be undefeated going into a game against the USC Trojans in College Park, Maryland. This is a Terps team that I think could really catch some attention early on. Now, this is also a Maryland team that historically maybe has lost some games that they should have won. I look back to that Northwestern game last season. Maybe there's some games where they come out a little bit flat. So they got to avoid that bugaboo this season if they want to be that surprise team. It would not surprise me. I think there's a path for the Maryland Terrapins to get somewhere maybe like an 8-win team or a 9-win football team as well. I want to finish with the team that I was on the edge about, or whether I wanted to include them in this or not. And I want to talk about the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, we talked about favorable schedules for a lot of these football teams. Minnesota is the team that maybe doesn't have the most favorable schedule, but when I look at their talent, when I look at their personnel, when I maybe look at PJ Fleck's track record, I see some good things really stacking up. I think Minnesota maybe has the most talent at the quarterback position that they've had since 2019 with Tanner Morgan. I think Max Brosmer really brings that to the table, right? You saw the latter years of Tanner Morgan, and then you saw the inconsistency of Ethan Kaliakmanis, and that was really the part of this offense that really lagged behind. We knew what they were in the run game, right? You saw Minnesota go from a really balanced offensive team that was really good in 2019, and then they went heavy run because they just didn't have the talent at the quarterback position. I believe Max Brosmer transferring over from FCS New Hampshire. A lot of people in Dinkytown are raving over this kid. Okay, and you watch him on film and you can see why they really like his talent here at Minnesota. So having that, if you got a quarterback, you got a shot to be able to cause some damage. But I think a main reason on offense why I think Minnesota could be a surprise team, that's maybe a contender to be a surprise team, is they've got one of the best running backs in the Big Ten Conference. Okay, there's a lot of talk about the backs at Oregon and the backs at Ohio State and the backs at Penn State, but you look at Darius Taylor and what he did last season as a true freshman before getting banged up a little bit, and he's a really, really good talent. He's somebody that Minnesota can really lean on as that bell cow. It would not surprise me to see him be a 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown type of running back, because if Darius Taylor works and if he can be that type of workhorse, everything else works around him. I think the passing game is going to become better. You look at Daniel Jackson, the leading receiver, returning for the Golden Gophers on the outside as well. I think everything flows together if Darius Taylor is that guy. I think they've got some big horses. They got some good players as well on the offensive line that I think can help in pass protection and pave the way for Darius. Now, the defense is kind of pulling me in a couple of different directions. When you lose Joe Rossi as your defensive coordinator, yeah, that's not a good thing. He's a good coach. He's a good coach. Michigan State got a good one. Some top 10 defenses that he coordinated nationally. Nationally, top 10 ranked defenses he coordinated in Minneapolis. So losing him, yeah, that's a big deal. But when you look at who the Gophers replaced him with, it's Corey Heatherman coming over from Rutgers. He spent the last 2 years as the linebackers coach over there, and they've really developed well at that position. In Piscataway, he was the FCS Assistant Coach of the Year in 2021 when he was defensive coordinator at JMU. So you have some accolades, and you maybe have some momentum that you can create with him coming in as the defensive coordinator. And once again, we're talking about talent. We're talking about the personnel that the Golden Gophers have. I think there's some players who could wreak havoc off the edge. Right, you look at Josh Joyner, you look at Danny Strigo, you look at Jackson Howard transferring over from LSU. I think they got some pieces there. Maverick Baranowski and a healthy Cody Lindenberg could be a really good linebacker tandem as well. Justin Wally, right, is a good cover guy back there in the secondary with some experienced defensive backs as well. Now, Minnesota, I think that North Carolina game right off the bat will tell us a lot about where this Gophers team is right away. That's a game where I think Minnesota has to establish themselves at the line of scrimmage against a North Carolina team that has just not been very good on the defensive side of the football. We get back to that schedule at Michigan versus USC versus Penn State versus Iowa, at Rutgers, at Wisconsin. Look, it's not the easiest schedule. Minnesota's a team where I could see them going 5-7. I could see them maybe at 8-4, and maybe they could even surprise by getting to that 9-win type of level as well. I want to hear what you guys think. Who do you think are going to be the surprise teams in the Big Ten? Did I miss anybody? Leave all things surprise Big Ten teams in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.